Number 1.
In the early 1900s, residents near the tiny town of Niagara, in the new state of North Dakota, began to hear strange noises in the night. The sound of galloping hooves punctuated the quiet countryside. It was farmer Eugene Butler again, who had recently started riding his horses late at night, yelling at the top of his lungs. It was strange behavior from a man who was known to be a wealthy, successful farmer, if somewhat reclusive. The townsfolk had no idea that, in the coming years, the story of Eugene Butler would get much stranger. On February 4, 1904, the Jamestown Weekly Alert republished a story that ran a few days earlier in the Grand Forks Herald. From brooding over the hallucination that all the widows and old maids in the country wanted to marry him, farmer Eugene Butler became insane and was committed to the insane hospital at Jamestown. Butler is about 40 years of age and has lived by himself for years on a farm at Shawnee. He is probably the wealthiest man who has ever been committed to an asylum from this county, his property being valued at from $40,000 to $50,000. In addition to the hallucination that all the women have designs on him owing probably to its being a leap year, Butler claims that men are in the habit of coming to his home during the night, forcing him to get up and dress and take long walks and horseback rides. In hindsight, there are a couple of clarifications that should be made to the Herald story. Butler's home was reported as being in a tiny railroad stop known as Shawnee, but today we know he lived in Niagara, about 6 miles to the northwest. Second, Butler was actually 54 years old at the time, not 40. At any rate, Eugene Butler was deemed insane and committed to the state hospital in 1904. Butler lived an apparently uneventful 8 years in the state hospital in Jamestown, but in November of 1911, 2 weeks after his death on October 22, 1911, Butler's name again appeared in the paper, this time the Saturday, November 4 issue of the Bismarck Tribune. The story, Filing of Petition Recalls Old Case, details the appointment of Butler's former attorney as the administrator for his estate and concludes that his estate would be divided between 2 brothers, a nephew and a niece. We're also offered a further glimpse into Butler's story. Butler came to Grand Forks County in 1880 with a number of others from New York State. He picked out 3/4 of a section of land near Larimore and started into farming. He rapidly improved the land and built a substantial home. He was accounted a moderately well-fixed farmer. In spite of the fact that he had made many friends, he continued to live alone on the farm, doing all the work about the house. About 10 years ago he was noticed to have changed considerably and at times at night would ride his horses at breakneck speed about the country. Those who are familiar with the case state that he lost his mind through his hermit habits. He gradually became worse and was brought here and taken before the Insanity Board. By 1915, Butler had been dead for years, and many had no doubt nearly forgotten about the strange man who had occupied the now vacant farmhouse on the edge of Niagara. But on June 27, 1915, the Bismarck Daily Tribune's headline announced a horrifying discovery in large type. Beneath the terrible headline, other details were disclosed in successively smaller fonts. Gruesome find by workmen in old basement. Bodies are those of men who worked for Butler on his farm. Accused man died at Jamestown in 1913. Victims dropped into basement by cleverly made trap door. The story read. Workmen excavating under a house occupied until a few years ago by Eugene Butler, who died in 1913 in state insane asylum, unearthed the remains of 6 men. It is believed by the authorities they were murdered by Butler while employed by him as farm hands. The skulls of each had been crushed. The bodies had been dropped into the basement through a cleverly constructed trap door. An added note near the end of the story added specifics from Butler's doctor while he was at Jamestown. Remembers Butler. Dr. Hotchkiss over the telephone last evening said that he remembered Butler, but that there was little about his case to distinguish him from the other insane patients. He showed great surprise when he learned of the gruesome find in the former home of Butler. Again, there is a detail in the story that should be clarified. Butler actually died in 1911, not 1913, and the belief that Butler killed 6 individuals in separate acts would later be called into question. In a story from the Bismarck Daily Tribune, July 1, 1915, the new theory became clear, again, Details were added through subheadings in successively smaller type. Examination of skeletons indicate 5 crimes were committed at once. Bodies had been stripped of clothing. No one in neighborhood can throw light on gruesome tragedy. The story continues, 5 murders at one time, when he wiped out an entire family, and one at a later date, when he slew a male adult, are the crimes laid at the door of Eugene Butler, the recluse farmer of Niagara, whose death in the asylum for the insane at Jamestown 4 years ago effectively draws a curtain before one of the most mysterious cases ever brought to light in the Northwest. Examination of 6 skeletons found under the Butler home near Shawnee, this county, shows that 5 of the murders were committed at one time when a man, a woman, and 3 children were slain. At some later date 1 man was killed. Bodies of the 5 members of the family were buried in a single hole, while that of the other victim was buried about 10 feet from them. The horrible record of the crime was unearthed by a workman engaged in excavating for a basement under the former Butler home. He first unearthed the body of the lone victim, which had been concealed under about 3 feet of dirt under the middle of the Butler home. The body had been dropped to its place of concealment through a hole cut in the floor. Buried from the outside. The 5 bodies were buried in a hole that was dug from the outside of the house, under the foundation. The hole into which these bodies were dumped was sloping in nature, and while time may have rotted the bones, there are indications that in order to hide his crime, Butler was compelled to break the legs of at least 2 of his victims. The foundation wall where the bodies had been buried was disturbed after its construction, which was about 20 years ago. That fact limits the period within which the murders occurred. In order to bury the victims, the 3 bottom stones of the foundation wall were loosened. In refilling the hole, black dirt was thrown in, and the manner in which the burial place was dug, indicated by the marked lines of distinction between the black dirt used as a covering and the red clay subsoil. Clothing removed. There is absolutely no trace of clothing of any kind. The dirt about the skeletons was carefully examined for trace of buttons, shoes, etc., but nothing was found, indicating that the bodies had been buried nude, their clothes probably destroyed by fire, thus effectively destroying the possibility of identification at this time. Examination of the skull of the single victim, and probably the most recent murder victim, indicates that the man had a crooked nose, the nasal bone being bent slightly toward the left. Each killed in the same manner. That some sharp instrument was used in killing the members of the family also is indicated. There is a sharp and clearly defined hole in the left side of the skull of each. The skull of the single victim is similarly marked. The authorities had apparently determined that the original theory, 6 transient farm laborers killed one at a time, was incorrect, and that a family of 5 was killed first, followed by 1 individual. Neighbors, however, did not remember a family of 5 ever visiting the farm, and nobody ever reported a family of 5 missing. One theory was that perhaps 5 of Eugene's family members came to visit, and he dispatched them before anyone had seen them at the farm. The passage of time between the murders and the discovery of their bodies further hindered any identification of the victims. On July 22, 1915, the Valley City Times Record published a story about a possible identity for one of the victims. Leo Urbanski, a wealthy businessman and former saloon keeper from Minnesota, wondered whether his brother might be the single male victim whose remains were found at Butler's farm, and asked his attorney to send a letter to State's Attorney O.B. Burtness. I have been requested to make inquiry concerning one John Urbanski who disappeared near Niagara, ND in 1902. The last heard from him was a letter received by his brother stating that he was working for a bachelor near Niagara. The postmark showed that the letter had been mailed at Larimore. John Urbanski was a young man about 5 feet 7 inches in height, weight 145 pounds, light hair, almost white, and light complexion. He was sometimes called John Miller, and such may have been the name he was called when working near Niagara. In the century since Butler's crimes were revealed, little progress has been made, and the victims have never been positively identified. There have been a number of theories proposed. The age and gender of the victims has been disputed, with some claiming they were all male. Others have speculated that they were all housekeepers on the Butler farm. In the age of DNA, some identification of the victims should be possible, right? A story from the Ward County Independent on September 2, 1915 said the bones of the victims were held in Grand Forks at the office of Sheriff Art Turner, but WDAY-TV Fargo reported in 2016 that, upon hearing of the crime, townspeople flooded to the Butler home and looted the bones of the victims. The whereabouts of the bones are unknown today. Unless someone comes forward with the remains, no DNA analysis is possible. In a further blow to the investigation, the original case files, if they ever existed, are missing, possibly destroyed or lost over the years. The Butler home was razed, and today a workshop owned by an area family stands on the site. Who were the victims of Eugene Butler? We might never know. Really, our only hope for resolution at this point is in the slim chance that someone still alive can provide a break in the case. Perhaps someone reading this might have their memory jogged. Maybe they found some bones in a box in their attic, or remember a story told by their parents or grandparents that could provide a break in the case of the Midnight Rider, Eugene Butler.
Number 2.
Forest Grove, Oregon is a relatively quiet place. Less than 30 miles away from Portland, it's primarily a commuter town. The continued presence of Pacific University, which was founded in 1849, has also long been a defining feature of the area, giving it a reputation for being a cute little college town, as well. This, perhaps, is why the strange, high-pitched squealing sound that shattered the silence for nights on end in February of 2016 made such waves. The mysterious Forest Grove sound, as it came to be known, was unlike anything the small city had ever experienced before. Some who heard it described it as a mechanical scream. Others called it a mystery whistle. To still others, it was a giant flute played off pitch, or even Satan's kettle. But no one really knew what it was, or precisely where it was coming from, and to this very day, they still don't. After its brief appearance in early 2016, it vanished and hasn't been heard since. According to Keuter News 2, Forest Grove resident Paula Lynch was the first one to sound the alarm about the mysterious news. Lynch told the outlet that she had first heard the noise sometime in January. Since then, she said she had heard it 4 more times. But although she did say she'd heard it at a variety of times of day, it was the late-night occurrences that really threw her for a loop. She recorded one such occurrence on Friday, February 12, 2016 and posted it on the Forest Grove Facebook page, and with that post, she kicked off a mystery that quickly went viral. To be fair, the noise is a lot less mysterious when you actually hear it than it is when you hear people talk about it. It's clearly mechanical in origin, likely the sound of metal scraping against metal, or of air or steam hissing loudly out of a pipe. It's not quite a mechanical scream, a phrase that brings to mind a humanoid robot shrieking in pain or anger, or any of the other descriptive phrases that anthropomorphized whatever might be making the noise. It is, however, annoying. Really annoying. And because it was so very annoying, it's no wonder that people couldn't stop talking about it. After Lynch reported the noise, officials took up the case, but numerous possible explanations were quickly discarded. Said Dave Niemier, then fire marshal of the Forest Grove Fire and Rescue, to ABC News, "It's definitely a horrendous noise. I have no idea what the noise is." The resident described to us that it was coming from the middle of the street. "To me, it sounds like the sound of train tracks, that metal screeching sound, but there are no train tracks near her home, so that's obviously ruled out." Similarly, officials ruled out water valves, a gas leak, wildlife, fire alarms, and more. Residents who spoke with various news outlets suggested it could be a worn brake pad or something similar. Some, though it might be something less mundane. We've had different suggestions from folks that it's an alien mothership or a warning sign of something to come, Forest Grove's police captain, Mike Erbs, told the Washington Post. But, as Public Works Superintendent Rick Vanderkin noted to ABC News, only a handful of people had heard the sound. As such, not only was it tough to figure out what might be making the noise, it was difficult even just to pinpoint where it was coming from. That's where Andrew Dawes came into the picture. A physicist who taught, and still teaches, at Pacific University, Dawes heard about the mystery and thought it might be worth creating some sort of public document where people could log their observations, including where they themselves heard the sound. Accordingly, He set up a Google map where people could drop pins in the spots where they bore witness to the strange mechanical shrieking along with any notes they might like to add. Dawes didn't necessarily intend to analyze the data himself. He mostly just wanted to help provide useful tools for people who might want to take on that challenge themselves. At its height, the map had about 30 pins on it scattered across Forest Grove, indicating spots in the city where residents reported hearing the unholy racket. But just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped, or at least, it seemed to. According to NBC News, the last pin was dropped on the Google map Dawes had set up on February 27. After that, there was nothing. The phone calls to City Hall tapered off, partially due to a statement released by the Forest Grove police on Facebook asking people, kindly, to stop clogging their phone lines. Calls about the sound, which they determined not to pose a threat to the community, were preventing them from dealing with actual emergencies and high-priority issues, but by and large, because of waning interest in the mystery. By the end of March, Andrew Dawes wasn't even convinced that the reported sounds were the same sound. He found there to be no pattern to the location-based data his Google map provided. It was all random, none of it ordered in a way that would suggest a single source. I believe people have heard noises that sound similar, he told Vice via email. I don't think they are from a common source or anything else mysterious. These days, the map is mostly empty, with only a few scattered data points remaining. The source of the sound Lynch originally heard was likely something mechanical failing somewhere nearby. It would have ceased when the failure was either complete or had been repaired. Fire Marshal Dave Niemier told the Oregonian at the end of March that officials believe it to have been a faulty attic fan or heat pump. And just like that, the mystery was over in that the sound had ceased to be an issue, but still unsolved. Here's the thing, despite the national frenzy that sprung up around the Forest Grove sound, it apparently wasn't that notable if you actually lived in Forest Grove. Some months after the incident, and months after the furor surrounding it had died down, writer Taylor Clark took a trip out to Forest Grove from his home city of Portland to see what exactly it was like on the ground there, and didn't find a whole lot. He was unable to speak to Paula Lynch, he wrote in his piece on the journey for California Sunday magazine. After the story broke, Lynch stopped speaking to the media and erased all of the Facebook activity around her video, except to say that she wishes she'd never posted at all, he noted. And more inflated with each news story until it became a terrifying sonic blight tormenting a community. He observed, wasn't that what we wanted to believe? That in our microscopically researched, data-crunched world, there are still mysteries out there that not even science can explain? It's perhaps worth noting that there are a number of odd, unexplained noises and sounds that have puzzled the world throughout history, one of which has been ongoing since at least the 1970s. The Forest Grove sound doesn't appear to be connected to the hum, as this long-running oral mystery is called. The hum sounds more like a trumpet, deeper and brassier than the high-pitched squeal of Forest Grove's auditory menace. But still, it's interesting, to say the least. But ultimately, the actual source of the noise isn't what's important about the Forest Grove sound. It doesn't even really matter that the precise source is still unknown and will likely remain as such in perpetuity. What's important about the Forest Grove sound is what we did with it, the way we took a small story and ran with it, inflating it and creating a full-blown mythology around it, even when all we really had about it was scraps of inconclusive information. Never underestimate the ability of human beings to create a story out of almost nothing. Because at the end of the day, that's what we are, storytellers. It's how we understand the world. How we explain it to ourselves. How we make sense of the things we don't understand. And even if turn out to be wrong, well, sometimes, it's not the destination that matters. It's how we get there that counts.
Number 3.
On the evening of August 1, 1990, Adam Emery, his wife, Elena, his sister-in-law Maria, and her husband, Ronnie, were sitting in Emery's 1985 black Thunderbird in a parking lot outside a restaurant in Rocky Point, Rhode Island, having just finished dinner. As reported by Independent, another vehicle, which was leaving the parking lot, struck the rear left side of Emery's Thunderbird, causing damage to the tail light, and immediately fled from the scene. However, another vehicle left the parking lot at the same time, and it was unclear which car hit the Thunderbird. Elena's sister, Maria, said she was certain it was a dark red Ford LTD that struck Emery's car. Emery proceeded to follow the Ford, which was being driven by Jason J. Bass, to confront him about hitting his vehicle and leaving the scene. Emery followed the Ford for nearly 2 miles before he intercepted the car and forced the driver to stop. Independent reports Emery admitted grabbing a knife as he left the vehicle to confront the other driver. He said he then approached the other car and said, "I just want to talk, you hit my car." However, Joshua Post, who was a passenger in Bass's car, said Emery shouted, "I'm going to kill you." As authorities later proved, Bass never hit Emery's car and was therefore frightened and confused as to why he was being accused. In an attempt to escape the situation, he put the car in reverse and tried to back away. When J. Bass put his car into reverse, Adam Emery lunged through the driver's side window and attempted to grab the keys from the ignition. As reported by Independent, Emery was unsuccessful and the car continued rolling backward. Emery later admitted he told Bass to stop the car and told him he had a knife. However, when Bass refused to comply, Emery said he had to do something because the diver didn't heed his warning. Independent reports Emery proceeded to stab Bass in the hand and chest. Bass's car eventually came to rest against a boulder near the driveway of a local prison guard named Bruce Bishop. When Bishop approached the car, Emery dropped the knife and admitted he stabbed Bass. Although Bass was not immediately killed in the attack, he was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at Rhode Island Hospital. As reported by Unsolved Mysteries, Emery was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Prior to his trial, Emery was held on $270,000 bond. Although he spent 8 months in custody, Independent reports his family eventually posted bond, and he remained free for nearly 2 years until his trial began. By all accounts, the accused killer remained employed and did not get into any trouble. He also appeared for trial as scheduled. However, he maintained that he killed Bass in self-defense. Emery was ultimately found guilty of second-degree murder on November 10, 1993. Unsolved Mysteries reports the judge agreed to let Emery remain free until the date of his sentencing, which was scheduled for the following month. However, the convicted killer seemingly vanished and has not been seen again. According to witness reports, Emery left the courthouse with his wife at approximately 3 p.m. on November 10, 1993. At approximately 3:30 p.m., the couple went to a sporting goods store where they purchased athletic socks, sweatsuits, and 80 pounds of wearable exercise weights. As reported by Unsolved Mysteries, the salesperson remembered the couple and said Elena was talkative and smiling. However, he did notice Adam seemed to be surprised about how much the items they purchased cost. Other witnesses reported seeing Adam and Elena eating at a fast food restaurant and described their demeanor as calm and did not notice any unusual behavior. At approximately 4:45 that same evening, Adam and Elena parked their vehicle on the Newport Bridge and were seen walking along the bridge's walkway. Unsolved Mysteries reports they were later seen driving away from the bridge. However, their unoccupied car was found back on the Newport Bridge at approximately 7 p.m. The couple had seemingly vanished into thin air. Months later, a local fisherman found 2 human leg bones, which DNA later confirmed belonged to Elena. Within a few weeks, Elena's skull was recovered from a nearby harbor. However, no trace of Adam Emery has been found. Based on the supplies they purchased at the sporting goods store and the presence of their vehicle on the Newport Bridge, it is believed that Adam and Elena Emery died by suicide. However, there were no witnesses and no evidence has been found suggesting Adam ever entered the water. The FBI confirmed their investigation into Adam's disappearance is ongoing. Although Adam was declared dead in 2004, he is still considered a fugitive by the FBI. In an August 2020 interview with 10WJAR, Kristen M. Satera, a spokeswoman for the FBI Boston Division, said, "No matter how long it takes, the FBI will continue to work with our law enforcement partners in following every lead until we can locate fugitive Adam Emery or his remains and provide his victim's family with some much-needed closure." A video which was recorded in the courtroom on the day Adam was convicted captured him and his wife having a whispered exchange. Although their conversation was inaudible, Newport Now reports a lip reader later confirmed Elena told Adam, "We will do what we originally said. You promised me. We should have done this before." However, it was unclear what she was referring to. Cetera said the FBI continues to receive and follow up on leads about Adam's whereabouts, and she hopes newly available technology will assist in their quest to figure out what happened to the convicted killer and whether he is dead or alive.
Number 4.
The second annual Lizard Man Festival was held at the Cotton Museum in Bishopville May 31 to June 2. The festival included panel discussion about Lizard Man and related paranormal topics on Saturday, and tours of the Lizard Man Trail, important Lizard Man locations, including Scape Ore Swamp on Sunday. Sometime in either June or July 1988, depending on the source, Christopher Davis, then 17, reported encountering a creature that quickly became known as the Lizard Man of Scape Ore Swamp. A newspaper article said Davis was attacked by a 7-foot lizard-type creature while he was changing a flat tire. The article quoted Davis, saying, "He said its searing eyes, 3-clawed fingers and snake-like scales made him initially believe he was under siege by the devil himself." The same article said 2 men told Lee County deputies they had been chased by a similar creature while they were getting water out of a spring 2 weeks before. The article said, "The mystery has fed on rumors, which have multiplied since Tom and Mary Way's car was mauled last Thursday while they slept. Their Ford's torn molding, indented sidewalls, broken hood ornament, along with red hairs and footprints left behind, indicate some animal was responsible," a report in 2009 said. In the summer of 1988, 12 more people claimed to see the Lizard Man of Scape Ore Swamp. Some people were chased by the creature, and others were slowly being followed until the creature was spotted and ran away. There were also more reports of mutilated cars. On July 24, 4 teenagers on a double date saw a massive-looking thing run across the road about 20 feet in front of them. Shortly after receiving this initial report, the police received several more reports of howling and screeching coming from the same area. Officers were dispatched to the area and discovered 3 40-gallon cardboard drums smashed and scattered all over the road. Several trees also had their tops torn off about 8 feet off the ground. There were also more 3-tooed footprints measuring 14 inches long by 7 inches wide that followed a trail almost 900 feet into the swamp itself. Authorities never figured out what led to the reports, but the legend has lived on, seemingly taking on a life of its own as the years passed. Numerous magazine and newspaper articles have been written about the legend. Several books have been written about Lizard Man, including one by Texas writer and cryptozoology researcher Lyle Blackburn titled Lizard Man: The True Story of the Bishopville Monster. Blackburn's book is even available on Kindle. Davis, the original Lizard Man victim, was back in the news in 2009, unfortunately, because he was gunned down in his home when he was 37. Lakeem Daver Butler, 19, and Anagori Santrell Slater, 22, were charged with murder in Davis's death. During the total eclipse of 2017, South Carolina Emergency Management tweeted a map of possible Lizard Man sightings from 1980 to 2001, overlaid on the path of the eclipse, with the tongue-in-cheek warning. This historical map is in response to recent media reports about possible paranormal activity associated with the upcoming total solar eclipse. SCEMD does not know if lizardmen become more active during a solar eclipse, but we advise that residents of Lee and Sumter counties remain ever vigilant.
Number 5.
It was Friday, June 24, 1994, the day that will turn upside down the lives of 2 families in South Dakota. 30-year-old Tina Market was finishing a late shift at Black Hills Molding, a wood processing plant. She was about to leave at around midnight when she discovered she had a flat tire. Tina called her best friend, Vicky Riddle, asking to pick her up. But the conversation was cut short. Tina noticed a car driving up to her. It was Tom Keuter, a forklift driver who previously worked with her at Black Hills Molding. Tina told Vicky that there is no need to pick her up. Tom would give her a ride. On June 25, Vicky received two visitors, Tom himself and Tina's live-in boyfriend and father of her 3 children, Patrick Gleason. Tina had apparently never made it home and Patrick was getting worried. When Vicky mentioned the call from the previous night, Tom denied having been anywhere near Black Hills Molding. They went to the police and reported that Tina had gone missing. The first thing the police found was the reason for Tina's flat tire. When they went to check her car, they confirmed that the tire had, in fact, been slashed with a knife. Tom was soon brought in for questioning. The police had been told about Tina's call to Vicky and wanted to know Tom's alibi. Tom said he had been to a softball game the previous night, drove a friend home, and then his car broke down in the middle of the road. He said he had spent almost 4 hours repairing his car. There were no witnesses to corroborate his story. His wife Nancy told the police that Tom did not call her the previous night to tell her about his car troubles. He came home at 3:30 a.m. and, uncharacteristically for him, started washing his clothes, including his shoelaces. 3 days after Tina's disappearance, the police came to Tom's workplace and informed him that they had found blood in his car. They told him it was being tested. The morning after the police told Tom that they are looking into the blood in his car, he was found dead. His co-workers at Forest Products Distributors noticed his absence during the shift change at 9 a.m. They discovered his body soon afterward. He was still at the premise, his head crushed under a forklift. 16 months later, Tina's body was discovered too, not very far away from Tom's. She was under a pile of woods at his workplace. The cause of death was determined as blunt force trauma. The police felt very confident that Tom had murdered Tina. He had orchestrated an emergency by slashing her tire with the intention to drive up to her and offer a ride home. Supposedly, he was attracted to her. Whatever transpired between the two, it ended with him hitting her head and killing her. What he didn't foresee was the call to Vicky. Her testimony put him in the spotlight as the prime suspect. Once the heat started turning up with the discovery of blood in his car, he killed himself and made it look like a workplace accident so that his wife and 2 children can collect insurance. This is what the police concluded. The discovery of Vicky's body at Tom's workplace over a year later only confirmed their suspicions. But there are some shaky elements in this theory. The logistics of suicide by forklift are difficult to pull off. The police theorized that Tom loaded it with lumber, drove it up an incline, and then quickly got out and laid down in front of its path. It's indeed a possible scenario. But realistically, how achievable is it? An even bigger question concerns the blood in Tom's car, supposedly the trigger for his suicide. The police stated it was being tested, but there is no official confirmation that it belonged to Tina. What were the results of these tests? The Keuter family were, of course, denied insurance. But 4 years after Tom's death, a judge revoked this decision and ruled that there was, after all, not enough evidence that Tom had committed suicide. Among people who believe that the conclusions around this case were rushed, the judge ruling further confirms that Tom's death is not as straightforward as it seems. They theorize that there was another player in the picture. Someone else killed Tina and then, seeing that Tom is becoming the prime suspect, killed him too, and then ran his head over with a forklift, deliberately making it look like a suicide. Later, he moved the body to Tom's workplace, a location that Tom would not have chosen as a hiding spot if he were the murderer, in order to remove any lingering doubt. Tom's wife, Nancy, is adamant that Tom would never have committed suicide and left her and their 2 children. She is convinced that he was framed. But while these are all good questions, none of them explains Vicky's testimony that Tina said Tom is giving her a ride, or Nancy's testimony that he uncharacteristically washed all his clothes when he came home at 3:30 a.m. Did the police get it right? Or maybe partially right? Whatever transpired on that fateful night in June 1994, it is unlikely we will learn more.
Number 6.
The legend of the blood-stained mausoleum, St. Luke's Episcopal Church on Broad Street in downtown Cleveland, Tennessee, was built in 1872. The church was built to honor the memory of 7-year-old Nina Craigmills, daughter of John H. Craigmills, butler of St. Luke's Episcopal Church. Nina was killed when the buggy she was riding was struck by a switch-engine train at the rear of the church, is a marble mausoleum. Over the years, this mausoleum has attracted curiosity seekers from all over the region. The tomb is the burial place for the Craigmills family, 4 members who tragically met their fate. The front of the mausoleum is constructed of white stone and is marred with streaks of crimson stain, rumored to be blood, and appears to have been left as a memoir of family. John Henderson Craigmills moved from Georgia to Cleveland around 1850. He and his brother, Pleasant, operated a successful mercantile business. John soon grew restless with the small-town Cleveland life and decided to travel west, setting his sights on the California goldfields. He soon discovered that prospecting, searching for gold, held little appeal for him. Before calling it quits and leaving the West, he made a discovery that would change his life and create his fortune. He soon realized supplies were needed when traveling throughout the Western Territory. He realized that a large amount of money could be made shipping these supplies from other parts of the globe. Craigmills purchased a small fleet of 6 ships and began a shipping line between California and Panama. Not only could he trade back and forth between Central America and the West Coast, but he could also carry passengers from the eastern United States who booked passage to Panama and then on to California. The shipping business prospered for some time, then disaster struck. Crews hijacked 5 of John's ships at sea and made off with the vessels and cargo. Claims from his creditors soon wiped out his fortune, but Craigmills refused to give up. He borrowed $600 from his brother, Green, and set out to rebuild his business with the one ship that he had left. By 1857, he returned to Tennessee, once again a very wealthy man. Soon after his return, John began courting a young woman named Adelia Thompson, the daughter of a local doctor, Gideon Blackburn Thompson, and on December 18, 1860, they were married. A few months after the wedding, the Civil War began. The Secretary of State for the Confederacy, Judah P. Benjamin, recognized John's head for business and appointed him the chief commissary agent for the South. He held this position throughout the war and reportedly used it to his advantage. Buying cattle and speculating in cotton, he sold goods to the Confederacy at a profit and made a fortune from the war. He was also wise enough to know that paper money was of little value and only traded in gold. After the defeat of the Confederacy, when the paper money printed in Richmond turned out to be worthless, John was not ruined as many other Southern businessmen were. In August 1864, Adelia gave birth to the couple's first daughter, Nina. John soon became devoted to the little girl, and along with her mother, grandparents and uncles, she became spoiled. Perhaps no one loved the little girl more than her grandfather, Dr. Thompson. He took long walks with her in downtown Cleveland, Tennessee, where she was popular with the shopkeepers, and often took her on medical calls in his buggy. They would spend entire afternoons enjoying the fresh air and journeying about town. It was during one of these outings that tragedy came to the Craigmills family. On October 18, 1871, Nina and her grandfather were off on a short jaunt in the buggy. No one knows how the accident happened, but somehow, Dr. Thompson steered the carriage in front of an oncoming train. He was thrown clear, but Nina was instantly killed. The whole town grieved for the little girl. John, Adelia, and the family were crushed by the loss and could barely function during the funeral services. When it was over, John began making plans to build a church in memory of his daughter. The Episcopal congregation in town had no permanent meeting place, and John felt that a new church in Nina's honor would be fitting. The ground was broken the following August and St. Luke's was completed on October 18, 1874, the 3rd anniversary of Nina's death. Almost as soon as the brick and stone church was completed, the family began construction on a mausoleum for Nina's body. It was placed at the rear of the church and was built from expensive marble with walls that were 4 feet thick. Across tops the marble spire of the tomb and rises more than 37 feet off the ground. Inside of the tomb, 6 shelves were built into the walls, and in the center was a marble sarcophagus into which Nina's body was placed. As time passed, the other members of the family followed Nina to the grave. The first to die was an infant son who was born to John and Adelia, but only lived a few hours. He was never named, but his body lies in peace next to his sister. John Craigmills died in January 1899 from blood poisoning. Apparently, he had been walking downtown one day and slipped and fell on the icy street. An infection developed and turned into blood poisoning. He died a short time later. Adelia, who married Charles Cross sometime after John's death, was also tragically killed in September 1928. She was crossing Cleveland Street when she was struck and killed by an automobile. She was laid to rest with the other members of her family in the mausoleum. The stories say that the bloody stains first began to appear on the Craigmills mausoleum after Nina was interred there. With the death of each family member, the stains grew darker and more noticeable. Some of the locals began to believe that the marks were blood coming from the stone itself in response to the tragedies suffered by the family. To this day, the bloody marks remain. What may have caused them and why they refused to be washed away remains a mystery.